The Federal Competition and Consumer Protection Commission has said it will delist any loan application harassing customers and asked Google to permanently delete such apps from its App Store. This was in response to the continued harassment and defamation being meted on Nigerians by these digital lenders. It was also the newest measure implemented by the federal government to protect Nigerians from the activities of these digital lenders. Earlier in the year, the FCCPC mandated loan apps to register with it. So far, 180 apps had received full or conditional approval from the Commission to operate in the country. Google also recently announced that loan apps will not be allowed on its App Store without regulatory approval. Joining us now is Babatunde Irukera, Executive Vice Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of the Federal Competition and Consumer Protection Commission. Good morning, Mr. Irukera, and thank you very much for joining us.
Good morning, thank you.
Well, let me ask you, what is the guarantee that, the helpless Nigerians who suffer from these loan sharks, some of them call themselves fintechs, would benefit from this initiative that you have introduced? And I ask that question, in terms of guarantee, because you recall, sometime in the past, you said you were going to protect us from these electricity distribution companies. There was even an event that was held for 4 days saying, the FCCPC will go after discos that do not deliver to the people. We are still suffering. Those discos, we haven't quite seen much in terms of protection. What is the guarantee this time around that you can protect us? Well, I don't go to loan sharks, but what is the guarantee that your initiative this time will work?
So thank you very much. The work we do with respect to consumer protection really has no destination. And for as long as people provide services to consumers, there would always be some level of dissatisfaction, whether it's electricity or digital lending. And our role in the electricity industry continues. We are resolving complaints every day and continue to fight and hold the electricity distribution companies accountable. I can only imagine what would have been if we were not doing some of the things we're doing. With respect to the loan sharks, this is something that we've been at for quite a while, and we've closed many. The ones who are now registered apparently were all operating in Nigeria before, and one way or the other. But what we did as part of our investigation was to ask Google to take all digital lending apps down if within a certain time they had not demonstrated that they complied with certain key and elementary requirements by the regulator, that is the FCCPC, and Google did. And so what you see with the 180 that are approved are the ones who have satisfied those regulatory requirements. And I might say that there are just a few out of the several who actually want to do that. The one thing that's very clear is that they have an important piece in the value chain of financial inclusion. People truly need them. And so what we've done is to say that those who are ethical and will treat people fairly are welcome to do business. Now, what we're seeing is that, and there's been a significant reduction, by the way, but what we are seeing is that there have been a few stories emerging again, saying that some of these digital lenders are continuing to engage in inappropriate conduct. Our concern is we're really keen to know that any of the digital lenders that have passed through our regulatory process and that we have allowed Google to put back on the Play Store are doing that. And our position is that if they do it even once, just once, we will permanently delist them, just once. And that's what the issue is now. Now, there's so many other digital lenders that continue this inappropriate conduct, as we discover them, we go after them. But it's difficult. They're on the World Wide Web, and some of them market their products by WhatsApp and below-the-radar methods. And as we find, we go after. The institutionalized, the broadest and legitimate way for them to do their business and to reach the most number of customers is to be on the Google Play Store. And so the ones on the Google Play Store must play by the rules. And when they don't, what we've said is there won't even be a second chance. There are things that they can do wrong that there could be a second chance, but with respect to harassing consumers or defamatory messages, there will not be a second chance. And the story came out on Nairametrics a few days ago. I think it was some kind of investigative journalism, and we've read it. And we recognize the points that have been made in that story. But what we're trying to do now is to establish the validity of those stories. Because the consequence, if any of those loan apps are listed by us, the consequence is so dire that it is very important that we validate the stories first. And that's what we would do. We would absolutely, without even an opportunity for a second chance, delist and make sure any app that is on Google but defames consumers does not get the opportunity to do legal business in Nigeria anymore.
Can we put a license into these loan apps that if they don't show the authentication of the licensing, Google should not accept them and place them on the Nigerian Play Store? Right.
And so what's going on right now is that the FCCPC, leading a joint task force, promulgated what really is characterized as the limited and interim regulatory framework. I think ultimately the landing point for a more robust regulatory framework is that the financial regulator would ultimately license, monitor, and supervise these businesses. That's not our core mandate, but what we've done is to create a bridge between now and when that more robust regulatory framework is. And I might say that that's what is operating now. Without an approval from the FCCPC, you can't get on the Google Play Store. And I think that that's something that even other countries are learning from. And Google, months after engaging and working with the FCCPC, even promulgated its own internal policy that says that digital lenders must not have access to private information, private data about consumers, which includes their contacts and all of that. So I think that what we've done is certainly shaping the industry, not just in Nigeria, but beyond Nigeria.
Mr. Irukera, an excellent initiative, given the details, to protect data, to prevent impunity. But there's a flip side to all of this, which is recovery. These lenders, when they give out these monies, most of the people who borrow money from them are bottom of the pyramid members of society. Isn't the problem that, look, when people take loans, they don't want to pay back. And then it creates problems. So is the FCCPC engaged in some kind of public education to tell people that if you go online to go and borrow money from digital lenders, you have an obligation to pay back? Is that part of the proposed initiative?
Well, I mean, the responsibility to pay back a loan is inherent in the commercial understanding between a lender and a borrower. And you're speaking to what really potentially is a cultural a challenge in the country about just the fidelity to pay back what you owe, whether it's a digital lender or even a large corporation. And so that is a totally different problem. But what we've said and what we insist on is that we respect, in fact, actually regard the prerogative, not just the prerogative, but the opportunity that lenders must have to recover their loans. There's a consumer protection aspect to lenders being able to recover the loans they give out, because that way they stay in business and are able to serve other people. But what we reject, and we can't find any rational basis to compromise that, is the method. I mean, you cannot, because there is a high rate of default, begin to engage in inappropriate ways of recovering loans. Globally, unsecured loans are risk loans. But and they found ways to make sure credit card loans are mostly unsecured. I mean, and over many years, globally, they even started saying, you know what, we will tie your credit card to a deposit. I mean, it's somewhat secured until you develop your credit, until you develop your credibility, and we know. And so what we need to do is, whether the the lenders and other players in the financial value chain must devise those methods that are acceptable, that are transparent for recovering their loans, including some way of verifying the credibility of the potential borrowers. There has to be a credit system, a credit verification system that is as accessible and as quickly as the loans themselves, where with people's BVN or their telephone numbers, you can tell if they are owing other borrowers. Most of the people who are failing to pay back these loans are chronic borrowers. And so if you have a problem of fidelity, of paying back your obligations, you should not have the opportunity to borrow again. But people who truly have a problem and fail to make a payment, or those who don't fail to make the payment, should not be subjected to the inconvenience, the aggravation, frustrations, or harassments that accompany these defamatory messages.
So I'm talking a lot of tech this one. Is there also a possibility of the Competition Bureau sort of like telling this, errant loan companies to also use AI to bolster their process rather than harassing everybody? Because with AI, for instance, you can see my financial track record, you can see if I borrow, you can see my income, you can see my capacity to be able to pay. AI in consonance with different credit bureaus. Could that also be a thinking around it?
That's an incredible question. And AI is an emerging space that regulators globally are trying to get their hands around, both from a competition standpoint and then certainly from a consumer protection standpoint. And we welcome the use of technology that promotes efficiency and some level of precision. However, even in the use of AI, there are questions about data protection, which are consumer protection issues. Any technology that gives you inappropriate access that invades people's privacy or gives data controllers some level of control or access to their subjects' data that is not with their consent or inappropriate, we will challenge that and essentially regulate it also. But I get the point you're making, and we welcome the use of technology to improve efficiency and innovation.
Well, Mr. Irukera, let me ask you, you talked about the method that these digital lenders adopt. Could you take us through some of those methods? You've talked about impunity, you've talked about threat, you've talked about the use of force. But are there specific cases that, the FCCPC under your watch has had to deal with in terms of illustration so that we get a sense, of the extent of the impunity of these loan sharks?
And so there are many methods, and many of the bad guys use some of these methods. Some of it is sending actually false information and publishing it to people on your contact list. Secondly is harassment, where they're not even engaging people on your contact list, but you yourself, and they threaten you. They say, if you don't do this by this day, we would get the police after you, or we would go ahead and publish that you're a chronic thief, or that you have HIV, or that you're on the run, all of those. So there's some level of falsehood, and none of that is appropriate. None of that are acceptable ways of recovering loans. Other problems that we've seen are loan balance calculations that make it absolutely impossible to truly completely repay those loans, and it's sheer champity. And so the information we require to register them now addresses that. Show us that you have a manual to train your recovery agents that would exclude the type of messaging that is prohibited. And where there's going to be recorded messages, let us understand what kind of recorded messages there would be. Show us your technology and show that it would not have access to people's contacts, their photos, and all of those things on their phones. Show us your complaint resolution mechanism. Show us that there's a way that people can reach you when they disagree, and that there's a formula and a reconciliation process when they question the loan balance calculations. Thirdly, show us what your interest rates will be. Because where we don't regulate interest rate, but we want to understand how you calculate balance, whether you're compounding, essentially compounding, meaning that unpaid interest becomes part of the principal, and then you charge an interest on the combination of the unpaid interest and the principal. And then, of course, we also want to know the source of the money. And that's a very important thing from all kinds of other security issues. So because if we gather information that seems to suggest that the source of money is suspect or questionable, we would advance it to the right agency, whether it's the NFIU, the NSA, or the EFCC, depending on whether we think it's a security issue or a criminal or a financial crime issue.
Yes, and we have to say the source of the money has to be checked because a couple of these apps, the source is always suspect. But real quickly, I also want to get updates on a couple of other issues that we've constantly talked about anytime we get a chance with you on the forum. The case of the chef, Pedro Goma. How far have you gone with that case, sir? Can you give us some updates?
Well, so as you probably followed, the FCCPC's investigation was actually truncated by the target of the investigation not completing the process. When the Nigerian Medical Association raised the question about the jurisdiction of the FCCPC to investigate doctors, and we took the position that we're not investigating doctors. We're not engaging in professional misconduct investigations. We do not have the mandate, we're not equipped, and we don't know how to assess that. But what we're investigating is conduct with respect to a facility and whether a consumer has been sufficiently protected. However, there are ultimately many tools that the FCCPC uses. Because there was also a coroner's inquest that was opened into that investigation, I personally led the FCCPC team to participate in the coroner's inquest, and all the questions that we would have asked of the facility and their doctors, we ultimately asked those questions. And the coroner's inquest has finally made a decision that allocates responsibility. The coroners decided that Premier Hospital failed in its duty of care and even identified specific doctors that it believed their conduct should be referred for professional investigation and discipline. The MDCN is doing that right now. Our understanding is that a few of the doctors who have been interviewed and assessed and investigated are already proceeding for a professional trial before the Medical and Dental Disciplinary Tribunal. And so as far as we're concerned, the case of Mrs. Pedro Goma has rested properly. What we needed to determine, which was what the hospital did or didn't do, what was wrong or what was right, and the processes with respect to their conduct, including how they hired their doctors, including what oversight they had over the doctors, all of that have emerged. And the coroner did an outstanding job of identifying all of that. So that report in itself is a conclusion. It's a message to the entire industry. It certainly is a message for reform for Premier. And it's a platform for us to continue any liability or enforcement work with respect to Premier.
Well, two more specific things. One, do you have a mechanism in place for checking, since you say this is not new, you've been on it for a while, but now it's come to the public domain more concretely, to protect innocent people that receive text messages and they are told, oh, Mr. XYZ is owing our finance house 100,000 naira. He's on the run, he's a debtor. Don't do business with him. Unsolicited messages. And they keep harassing you all the time, talking about other people. What does not concern the receiver of the message? That's one. Two, do you have a mechanism in place where, people who want to report these loan sharks can go to and say, FCPC, please come to my rescue. This is a particular incident and I'm being harassed, I'm being terrorized because I have borrowed money. Because when you borrow money, it's also contractual. Why don't they deal with it at a contractual level?
Good. And so once we succeeded in making sure that the digital lending companies could not access the contact details of their borrowers, we addressed that. And so the times that it's still happening are, one, those who are not on the Play Store, or those who are on the Play Store and are violating the terms of their listing, which are the ones we're trying to make sure we figure out whether it's still occurring so we can delist. Because the solution to that is that once people don't have access to other people's contact, they can't send messages to their contacts. And one of the theories of liability for us was that beyond the borrower, your telephone number is your proprietary private information. And you choose who you give it to. If you give someone your telephone number, it's a choice you made. And so you have an interest in who that person gives your telephone number to. And so you find that some of the people who are even very cultured, if I asked somebody for your telephone number, the person would probably reach back to you first and say, Dr. Babatunde has asked for your telephone number. Is it okay to give it to him? That's appropriate. And so that demonstrates that your telephone number is your proprietary information. And so what we're doing beyond protecting the borrowers is also protecting consumers, people who have exercised their prerogative to share their telephone numbers with other people, but who didn't anticipate and are not part of this contractual mutual understanding between the borrower and the lender. And so the solution to that is just making sure that these digital lenders don't have access to the contact list of the borrowers.
Yeah, but I asked you, a group persons, is there a platform, a portal that they can come to report
Correct.
to you?
Yes. And what we did when we started the investigation was to open a dedicated platform, and the email to that is the Lenders Task Force. The Lenders Task Force at the fccpc.gov.ng. And we continue to harvest complaints from that and address them as best as we can.
Okay. So Lenders Task Force is also a number they can call. Do you guys have like a switchboard? You know, because not everybody can send email and things like that. Do you have like a switchboard where people can call? If not for only this
we do
loan
have
app,
a switchboard, but
if not only for this loan app, for even other issues, you know, like you remember the issue of the restaurant?
Yes.
You know, that was denying Nigerians from coming in, that restaurant that you guys had to go short. If we see any other thing that is like anti-consumer protection, is there like a switchboard number?
Right. There are a few telephone numbers that we called our contact numbers, general contact numbers, and there's always someone who mans that. I'm going to make sure that somebody sends that so that we can put it online, but you can find them on our website. But beyond that is that we actually have a complaint app, and not app, actually a platform, but an app also, because it's on the website. It's on our website, and you can find it in the App Store also. So you can download it and literally file a complaint, provide information, whistle blow. And so there are all kinds of channels by which we're happy to receive information. And in any case, even apart from this dedicated Lenders Task Force email, we also have the contact FCCPC email address, so that we receive all kinds of information, whether they're complaints, whether they're alerts, whether they're even requests, questions, even job requests and all of that. We receive that from at a general contact email address, and somebody sifts those emails and sends them to the appropriate departments within the FCCPC.
Okay, I want to ask you, how difficult is it doing this job? Because I know you've also been navigating against forces that have done things that are against the law, but they kind of put pressure, or maybe companies that you're dealing with and telling to focus on the law and abide by the law, but they go call people high up there, you know, in leadership positions to help them wade in. I mean, how do we deal with things like this? Because it is things like this that really dampen the image. And I must commend you for your wonderful yeoman's job you've been doing, and you know, your steadfastness, because it's quite very difficult, because we know forces that be will always want to truncate good work like you're doing in Nigeria.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And to some extent, it is very cultural for us in Nigeria. Instead of confronting the issues, to just reach out and try to seek informal solutions. The sheer number of times I say to even my friends who are lawyers like me, and when they reach out to me, I say, stop for a minute. Where else in the world do you pick your phone and have a private conversation with the regulator about resolving a regulatory issue? There must be a transparent and a uniform way of addressing this issue. And that doesn't eliminate our culture and the informal engagement, but whatever the case may be, it cannot be a substitute for the appropriate method. And what we have done, what I have particularly done, and thankfully I think it helps that I'm a lawyer and with a history of litigation in public interest issues, was that, you know what, I'm going to focus on establishing what went wrong. We will do a transparent investigation that we confront the targets of the investigation with. And that always helps. And so whenever they go over us to have conversations in any place, all we do is to present our work. and the work would speak for itself. And the vast majority of people who we have investigated almost always come to the understanding that, you know what, we admit what went wrong, even if there are gray areas. The other thing that we've done is that we've embraced the legal process and the judicial process. And again, because I'm a regulator, I welcome judicial challenges to what we do. The one thing I'm very strict about is that we will stretch the law to its maximum elasticity, but we will not step 1 inch beyond the law. And because of that, we're confident and we welcome judicial challenge. For instance, and I go to court myself, and I might say that in the almost 5 years of the FCCPA, we've got a pretty good run. We have a 0 loss record from the judicial process. And so with each year, the process, the jurisdiction, and the legitimacy of the FCCPA and the processes of the FCCPC are becoming strengthened. And that is institutionalization for the future. Most recently, a judge in Abuja decided a second time that the FCCPC has absolute jurisdiction to investigate anything to the extent that there is a consumer protection or a competition dimension to it. It was a case where Premier Academy, where a student had died, and there were controversial questions about the circumstances of the death, and we were going to investigate it. You cannot operate a school, including operate a boarding house, where people are entrusting their children to you, and then there's an allegation of malfeasance, and you'd say that we do not have jurisdiction. They challenged the jurisdiction of the FCCPC, saying that the police and all, and the medical people and all kinds of other people were investigating. And we went to court, they sued us, and we went to court, and the court decided that, yeah, the FCCPC has absolute jurisdiction to do that. It was the second time, even with respect to the doctors. We had started prosecuting a doctor, a cosmetic surgeon out of Lagos, and they had gone to court to challenge the jurisdiction of the FCCPC to look into medical practice. And we clearly made it abundantly clear that we're not looking into professional conduct, we're looking into consumer protection. And the court again affirmed that absolutely the FCCPA not only empowers the FCCPC to do this, as a matter of fact, indeed mandates the FCCPC to do it. And that's not all. Even with large corporations, we opened an investigation once and asked one of the biggest companies in Nigeria. Yes.
Mr. Irukera, well, we have limited time.
And what did he? Yes.
We have limited time now.
Okay.
But I want to ask you a question. You've used the word culture twice in the course of this conversation. You've also talked about chronic borrowers. Okay, so we're talking about lenders and borrowers. Okay, Samuel P. Otuntin says culture matters. So you are right to talk about culture. But will you recommend that wisdom in Shakespeare's Hamlet, Polonius, in Shakespeare's Hamlet, that neither a lender nor a borrower be? Particularly for people at the bottom of the pyramid. If you don't go and borrow money, you try to live within your means, there will be peace. You won't have issues trying to protect the consumer. Will you recommend that, or that's too much to expect in the 21st century?
I am a consumer protection regulator and competition. So we regulate commerce. The very heart of commerce is credit. Whether it's big business or small business, whether it's consumerism, the very heart of commerce is credit. What we must do is to develop the mechanisms to promote responsible borrowing. But the very heart of commerce is credit. And with respect to the digital lenders, we've seen that some of those lendings are so vital. People borrow money to buy medication for their children. It's vital. We can't even develop. I mean, part of how you determine how vibrant or robust an economy is how much credit is happening and how much consumers are spending. And so it's come to stay. We just have to regulate it the right way.
Well, on that note, we'd like to thank you very much, Mr. Babatunde Irukera, Executive Vice Chairman, CEO, the Federal Competition and Consumer Protection Commission. Thank you for joining us.